All right. So welcome everybody, especially our panel members in this beautiful studio today and our participants online. I'm very glad to let you know that we have around 184 registrations for the session today, and for me that demonstrates the fact that it's a relevant topic that people want to know more about. So let me just quickly stand still in why we're doing this session. As Everable, we have observed that there is a significant gap in knowledge and skills in the world of DevOps, and we want to contribute addressing that gap. And we want to do that by ensuring and executing a series of webinars where we're going to raise the awareness on the topic, and we're going to make sure that we address the topic. So what I want to do is stand still how we're going to conduct today's webinar. Maybe we have the agenda as well put on the screen. So we're going to ask our participants to introduce themselves, the panel members to introduce themselves, after which we're going to go into a conversation where the panel members will discuss statements that we have prepared for them. So in the discussion of the statements, if you feel you have a question that you want to ask one of our panel members as a participant online, please do so by addressing that in the chat, saying to whom the question is for. And then after the three statements are discussed, we're going to pick up the question and we're going to go into what we call a Q&A mode part of the webinar. So as we're going to try to address as many questions that we are able to do so. So that will be the Q&A part, and after which we're going to go into closing of the webinar, where we're going to have a poll for you because we want to improve as well. So we're going to ask you the question, what you liked about the webinar, what we can do better, but also very importantly as well, what are other topics you would love to get addressed in the next webinars. So the second webinar will be held somewhere in September, and the third one somewhere in November, end of this year. So having said this, I think we're set to go, and I would like the first panel member to introduce himself, and I'll ask Stefan to start with the introduction.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm Stefan Simenon. I'm head of public cloud platform with an ABN AMRO bank. Working at ABN AMRO, working in a bank, compliance and security is very important. I am myself also getting more acquainted with the security topic. So therefore I'm here, and therefore I'd like to contribute to this panel session.
Thank you, Stefan. Helen?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the invite, I guess, first of all. My name is Helen Schedeler. I'm our lead for Accenture Netherlands for our security and behavior team. And I'm very pleased because of this invite, because I like to share my own experiences from my own client experiences, but also to gain hopefully some more information from you as experts. So very pleased to be here.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Cheyenne?
Yeah, my name is Cheyenne Seur. I've been working in cybersecurity since 2014. I like to describe myself as a self-taught security professional. So I know a thing or two about upskilling in cybersecurity. And currently I'm working as the security lead for Currents Ideal. And, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for you guys for accepting the invite and being here. I think we're going to have great conversations. So we're going to start with the first statement, and I would ask the first statement to be put on screen and to be shared in the Zoom meeting. So I'm going to read out the first statement, and then I'm going to ask the panel members to have a conversation about it. So the first statement is, there is a significant gap between the world of DevOps engineers and the world of security experts. And this is a gap in understanding each other. So I will ask Stefan to first respond to what he thinks about this statement.
Yes, so I recognize this gap, working at ABN AMRO, but also talking to colleagues outside ABN AMRO. The question is whether you should call it a gap or not. A security expert, they are focused on security. A DevOps engineer, they would like to have development freedom. They would like to deliver software in a fast way. What I see is that if I compare the current world with 4 or 5 years ago, the gap is reduced. DevOps engineers They understand that they need to handle security. They understand better that they need to do input validations. They need to upgrade their libraries. Well, a few years ago, that was a total unknown field for them. And at the same time, I see security experts also understanding more and more the field where the developers are working in. So within ABN AMRO we are working already for 5 years in a public cloud journey. So that certainly has helped. And important is that the people talk to each other and they understand each other. And there always will be a different, there will be a kind of difference in interest or a conflict of interest. And in those fields, the risk should be identified, and the management should decide how to handle the risk. And then a risk could be handled different for an application which contains privacy information than if not. And in a bank or in a healthcare company, risks will be handled different than in a food delivery company, for example. And so I believe there is a gap, but the gap is reducing, and it's also healthy that the gap is there to take the right things forward. And what is most important, that the risk is identified the right way, and that the decision is done the right way, how the risk is mitigated or accepted or avoided, taken forward.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. Any one of you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. I do agree with the statement. There's a gap. I also agree with Stefan that the gap has become smaller over the past years. But I think the gap has mostly become smaller in the knowledge aspects, because I think a lot of DevOps engineers have obtained more security knowledge over the past years, and the same more security experts have gain knowledge on how DevOps works. But I think in especially bigger organizations, security processes and procedures have not always adapted to fit a DevOps world. And I think the gap there is still very big. Security should be an enabler, not something that stops development, I think. So I think there's definitely some work to do there to make that gap a little bit smaller. And also, because I look at this from a security perspective, of course. I'm not a DevOps engineer. I'm a security expert. There's a lot of different people working in security. There are people who work in security who are very technical, and I think there the gap is quite small because they understand the world of a DevOps engineer a lot more than someone who works in security and, for example, does a vendor risk assessment. It's a completely different perspective. So just saying a DevOps engineer versus a security expert is, I think, a bit too narrowly scoped, because it's actually, there's a lot more context there in the levels of knowledge and the levels of understanding between those people. But yeah, for sure the gap has become smaller over the past 5 years. I agree with that.
Great.
Maybe one question specifically, because you just mentioned at the beginning the gap itself, and about two worlds maybe understanding each other and speaking the same language. Maybe it's a question to, I think, both of you, but how do you actually let these two worlds talk to each other? How do you let them understand where they come from and how they understand each other's background and each other's risk? Do you have examples maybe that you've used yourselves, or how do you try to sort of close in that gap from starting the conversation between these two worlds?
Yeah, so what happens in our company, that once a project is started or once activity started in a DevOps team, that the risk assessment is done and that the security expert is included in an early stage. So that once a design is there, that the security expert can have a look into it, and that the security expert can identify the risks with that process, and that there is a good discussion between the developers and the security expert. And once that process is done the right way, then you also see that there is better mutual understanding between the engineer and the security expert. And then you also see that it's more easier to identify solutions at an early stage. In the past, there was a project done, the project went to production, and then and then just before production, security came, had a look to the project, and lots of issues were identified. Yeah. And then there was lots of time pressure to go to production because people want to meet their production deployment deadline, and then lots of misunderstandings start to happen. So as soon, so my advice would be, involve the security experts as soon as possible in the development stage, because then you can mitigate things easier, and it's also better to understand each other, because you don't have that delivery pressure.
True, and I think moving security to the left definitely works, but it's not as easy, I think, as it sounds as on paper, where we say, well, let's bring security in sooner, because of course.
But what also helps is that tools have been introduced to check security during software development, static coding tools. And then if you introduce them the right way, and if you explain why, and if you help development engineers to use the tools the right way, then it also reduces the gap.
I think it's more than just involving a security expert early on. I think it's the DevOps team feeling responsible for the security of the product that they develop. They then are responsible for the product. The security expert that should collaborate with the team very actively, I think, should be seen, I think, as a base of knowledge. So if the team has a question in regard to security and they don't know the answer themselves, this is where this person comes in to help them and teach them more, and not just to tell them you should do this or you should do that.
But therefore it is important that the security expert also tells the development team what is the risk, what could be possible
Exactly,
impact,
and also knows what the development team is actually working on, because just throwing a couple of generic security requirements over the fence doesn't work. You should know the technology the team is working with in order to give tailored advice.
Yeah, and I like what you said in the beginning as well, Cheyenne, to say, okay, we cannot call all the security expert on the, this statement over here. And I think if I look at ABN AMRO, Stefan, it's not all the organizations have that large of security department that will go to the DevOps teams and can help them. Some of them are really on the policy level. So I really would still like to think along what is what we can do to close that gap, if there is that gap, right? Because the world is moving towards DevOps, the world is moving towards the cloud. What is it that we can do to close that gap? And I think that goes back to the original question you have asked. If you don't have the luxury of having such a large organization.
I think the answer to that is stop seeing security as something separate. I personally don't think it should even be a separate department, because security is part of IT. So you shouldn't see it as something separate. It's inherently as important to the product as any functionality is.
So you're saying if you're going to make security part of the IT department, there will be less barriers mentally as well to collaborate.
Yeah, because it's a responsibility of everybody to do something security related, and not of one separate department to tell the rest of the organization, oh, by the way, guys, you should do something on security.
Yeah, okay.
I think I agree there, because I think what you saw in the past is we had the silo, sort of the island of security has something to do with IT. It is for the IT folks. Then we had the move where we said we'll have security professionals positioned in the business, but then still this was security specific. But now we need to upskill actually every individual. If it's an engineer, if it's marketing, if it's HR, it actually doesn't matter. Everyone needs a component of cybersecurity in their DNA to understand why it's important for their own roles and responsibilities, I would say. So yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, and I think that also is because in our everyday lives, the importance of cybersecurity is increasing. So it's an essential skill for anybody to have nowadays.
But I agree with you, but it's also an ideal world. Many companies are not yet at that stage.
No, but it takes time. And I think, time will solve a lot. That's what we also see with the gap. It's smaller than 5 years ago. So it just takes time, because it's also a big behavioral aspect, and people don't change overnight. So.
But agree, because awareness that this is the problem, also we're not there yet. I think maybe 2 or 3 companies understand that everyone needs to be a part of security, but we're still having the conversation that is actually the problem on the table. So yeah, I agree, we're not there yet.
It also helps that there are sometimes some severe vulnerabilities. The Log4j issue, for example, that also has created a lot of additional awareness among the development community. It should not be. It should not be the way. It should be that way, but
sadly,
it's the truth.
Open the newspaper, and it's free marketing for us. I would say, as our profession.
Good, great, guys. I think our time is up for this statement over here, and I would like to propose to go to the next statement. Can we have the next statement on the screen, please? And the statement is as follows. Investing in security knowledge and skill for DevOps is a waste. Eventually, skilled DevOps engineers, they leave the organization. So who wants to go first on this one?
Can I start with the statement?
Please, sure.
I think if you don't invest in DevOps engineers, they will leave the organization anyhow. So I think it's a bit of an odd statement, actually. You should invest in your employees, and security is a quite significant part of the job at the moment. So you should invest in it, and people are going to leave organizations anyway. We're not 30 years back where people would work for the same employer all their life. Maybe Stefan.
Maybe not.
But if I look at myself, I've also switched last year to a different employer. It's a natural way of how people work nowadays. So using that as an excuse to not invest in your employees is, it's not an excuse, I think. And also, if everybody would invest into their DevOps engineers and giving them security skills, you help each other, because then you hire someone from a different company who already has a basic set of security knowledge. So you create this ecosystem where most DevOps engineers have security skills already. So in the hiring pool, there's also a lot of options there. So you should invest in it.
A non-brainer for Cheyenne, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, agree indeed. I guess the question itself is not just related to security, it's indeed the hygiene you have as a company and the responsibility towards your own employees. How do we retain people the best we can, but also offer them the opportunity to grow in their roles and their responsibilities? Because just focusing on the traditional way, like you say, people are not asking for an employee where you will stay for 10 or 20 years. That's not the norm anymore. So what do you do to respond to that is, do you have recognition programs? Do you have specific learning and training programs, and not just sticking to the traditional, we have to follow these certifications because they're required in my industry or in my profession, but what do we see out there, and dare to maybe look that if you are an IT engineer, it is okay to maybe follow a training in a complete different topic. It might be presentation skills, because that might be needed in a team meeting on a monthly basis. It can be completely different than just focusing on this is what the industry requires and these are the bare minimum, because I think specifically for security we have a very long list of requirements that we ask each other that are very specifically from a, maybe more technical standpoint they are required, but not as much from a personal growth and what people intrinsically motivates them in their daily roles and responsibilities. So I would definitely advise to look further and connect with learning teams in the organization, and not just focus on the traditional IT topics that are on the table.
Yeah, I think the intrinsic motivation you mentioned is very interesting, because I've met a few DevOps engineers in my time who are very motivated to learn more on security, and they would be told by their departments, we don't have budget for that, because security trainings are very expensive sometimes.
Yeah.
And then you block someone in their development, while it would actually be really valuable to the organization to invest in that. And to stimulate this person also to do what they like, because that's how they stay at your company, right? If there's enough work nowadays for skilled DevOps engineers, also for security professionals, so if people feel they're not valued or not enjoying it and not be able to learn more on their profession, they're going to leave.
Yeah. So if I hear you correct, right, Cheyenne, so you're saying anyway we should be investing, because if you're not going to invest in them, in growing the skills and the knowledge, they're going to leave anyhow. And Helen is saying, okay, not only the technical aspects you should invest in, but also look at the software aspect of the role. The question is that I have done is there, in your opinion, are investment happening enough? Is there enough investment happening currently in organizations in upskilling our people then? And maybe, Stefan, this is also a question to you that you can...
So if I look to my own organization, within ABN, we have lots of opportunities for learning. So for example, every person has €3,000 development budget. Following a course like CISP or expensive security course, that's simply possible. And and my advice is also companies should invest in this. And I even find there is an even higher risk than skilled people leaving. There is the high risk that non-skilled people are staying. So if I look to my own company, so there's lots of opportunities, and I also agree with you that you should leave that to the people to make their own plan. Don't make a list that every person should do this certification or this study. People have different roles, people work in different projects or teams, and you need different kind of skills, so different kind of educations. And as an IT lead, as an HR manager, you should be guiding the people and stimulating the people to do the right people, but it's in the end, they should own their own education.
Yeah, and maybe step out of the traditional helplines that you have. So have your IT lead or have the IT director step out to the teams that understand how learning works. What are the best practices in market now?
Yeah.
Because if we have the traditional, the simplest example, I think we just touched upon this just before we opened this session. I think we couldn't wait for the session to start. The traditional awareness trainings, for instance. The training that you do now, they're outdated in 6 months. That doesn't work anymore. So really connect as an IT director or manager with the learning teams to understand what is there in the market at the moment that people really like doing. We don't like the traditional e-learnings. We don't all want to do those expensive courses anymore. There are a lot of new innovative ways on actually sharing examples of other companies or innovative ways to learn with VR or, well, I can name a long list, but I think you understand the gist of the message.
Yeah, what I also think is highly skilled people want to work with other highly skilled people. I always want to work with people that I can learn from. So if you invest in your current employees, you will also attract good employees because of that. Because people want to be part of those kind of teams.
And what is your guys' advice in terms of people that are not so motivated to keep investing in learning new skills, whether that's soft skills or hard skill? What is your advice in that? What sort of program can be organized from an enterprise perspective, but also from a managerial perspective, to help people get more motivated to get it done?
I think inherently most people do want to learn, but a lot of people are expected to do that outside of office hours. And that makes it hard for some people to do that, and not everybody is willing to invest in that amount into their own development. So I think it should be a shared thing also between the employer you're working for and the person themselves, but you should also be given time from your employer to invest in your skill set, because you use that at work every single day. So you cannot expect people to always, learn outside of their working hours or get 2 study days a year, because realistically for any security training, 2 study days is not going to be enough. And if you're swamped in a job where you already work 60, 70 hours, I can imagine that people are not investing in their own development, so make it easy for them by providing them with time to do it.
Yeah, and maybe another is, I guess, skilling and training, learning, it can be a bit fluffy every now and then, so I would say make it as factual as possible. So use the data, so really assess what workforce do I currently have, what sort of skills do I need in this workforce if I want to survive in the next 2 to 5 to 10 years. And then you'll see which gaps you have skill-wise, and then you'll know in discussion with your employees who would like to grow in what skill. So what do we need to teach internally? What might we need to hire externally? Do we need to bring in new colleagues with specific skills and knowledge? But that way you can make it very actually data-driven, and then it makes it easier for you to schedule and plan ahead as well. And then it's not so much to the individual itself, but for you as a manager as well to understand what gaps do we need to fill in the coming 2 to 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so also my view is that the organization should enable the people, but the people themselves should have the right mindset. They should have the right motivation to learn now themselves. If people are not motivated themselves to learn, then I think they are simply not the right person to be hired for that company.
Not fit for the job.
Exactly. People who do not want to learn are not fit for the job in today's world.
I think it also really depends on what you say, right? So, for example, we earlier talked about security awareness trainings. A lot of security trainings are really boring and dry material. So I can imagine that if you're not particularly into security already, maybe as a DevOps engineer, you get this really dry, boring training that you're not going to be motivated to learn any further. So it's also about making trainings more engaging and fun, because it's a super interesting field. And sometimes we ourselves as security professionals make everything sound so boring, even though it's so interesting and a lot of cool things are happening, so we should highlight those. I
think one client once was the best question I ever had on the table. Can you help us make security sexy? And we're like, yes. Let's make that work.
I think it already is, but we just need
For
to...
us, because we like the topic, but a
Yeah.
lot of people find it boring, compliance-driven, it minimizes your freedom in your work.
So what was your answer to that client, by the way, Helen?
Well, it took a while, I must say, because it was for us quite a challenge as well. I did accept it with both hands because I liked how they phrased it. But actually, we're still doing it, is we're actually skilling the full leadership team in the world for this specific client. Everyone outside of security, so we don't have any IT professionals there, but we're making it fun, and fun by using interactive and innovative ways of learning. And they actually really like the topic, and we're actually getting more and more questions, and there's more of a dialogue between security and the business instead of security pushing out the requirements, the requests and the training. So it's definitely working, I would say.
That's nice to hear. We're successful with that. I think we need more of that, by the way. I think we are out of time for this statement over here. I'm getting the signal. So my suggestion is that we go to the next and the final statement, and then after which we'll do the Q&A. So can we have the next statement, the third and final statement on the screen? And it goes as enterprise-wide security trainings for IT engineer is not available. There is no clear budget owner for this. So whether the budget comes from the CTO, CISO, CIO, HR, it's not clear who's funding the security trainings for IT engineers on an enterprise-wide level. So, who wants to go?
We're jumping on this. I'll go. There's no clear budget owner for this. I think this might be a bit of a, if you put it a bit in a stigma, is the IT, I guess, population, or the specific IT security label we would put on most of these teams, is that this is not a marketing group. This is not a group that sells itself easily. They're focused on content. They're focused on being risk adverse, if I'm very, very, very making it black and white. And it doesn't come natural to sort of push those risks externally to people that don't understand security. I think, like we said just now at the beginning, luckily, we have a lot of marketing external, so in the papers, in the news about security, so people are aware of, I need to do something with this, but still a lot of people don't really know exactly how to respond to that. But I think as security teams, go to the person in the organization that will actually have the most impact if it does go wrong, which eventually leads up to the CFO. I know there are a lot of other risks. There are a lot of other impact around, like for instance, the reputation of a company if something really does go wrong on a large scale. But in the end, it's the financial burden that usually gets the biggest, bump actually for the organization, and that ends up in the CFO line. So I think specifically, don't just sit in that security silo again like we traditionally were used to, but go to the people where this topic will hurt the most, and then they will wake up. Really, show what the value is of the programs that you have, the added value, which is difficult because it's something that might happen in the future. So you're responding to a risk that might not be there at this moment, but show them the facts and figures and really let them feel, if this goes wrong, this would be the impact for you. And then specifically a CFO does wake up because it is his worst nightmare at this moment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. So if this is the case in a company, this senior management should fix this, because if there is no budget available, people will not educate and people will leave. It's a little bit related to the earlier statement. And even if there is a limited budget, even if a company has a limited budget, there is lots of free trainings on internet. You have free Azure trainings, you have even CISP and all kind of security trainings. You can find a lot of trainings on internet, so be creative. But
I think that's too careful, to be honest, because then again, security is one on the list of they're requesting budget.
I understand. But it can be the case that there are companies who have simply limited budgets, and then you need.
But the budget of a training towards the impact of a large-scale event.
I fully agree on that, but I only say if there is limited budget, you can be creative. But I fully agree that if this is happening in a company, this should be fixed. And I also even believe, and also agree with you, that having the right budget for trainings and following the right trainings will pay back at a at some medium term.
I think as IT we should just step up literally to the board and just say, how can you sleep every night if we have teams that do not have the required skills at this moment. I wouldn't sleep if I knew that we wouldn't have that budget allocation at least.
Yeah, but what do we see, if I can make it a little bit sharper, the discussion. So where is, if we talk about budget for upskilling IT engineers and DevOps engineers from a security perspective? So in the example that Cheyenne gave, there was this DevOps engineer, he really wanted to do security, but he didn't got the budget to do it. So where should that ideally be allocated? Is it with the CISO department? Is it with the department that employs the IT engineer? Should there be a centralized budget for learning from HR? Like, what is a good practice in that? What are you guys' thoughts on that one?
I believe there should be department budget. Each and every department should have budget available for learning and for study. So every department should have budget available to
including the security budget.
Exactly. So there should be budget, and then the department should be deciding whether it's security or other related topic. As I said, because one department can be affected by security more than by other departments. And it's up to the department, the employee, the IT lead, to allocate the budgets the right way. Yeah? So, and that's the way how it is organized within ABN AMRO. And within ABN AMRO, that is totally not a discussion. Budget is simply there. But I don't know how that works in other companies.
Yeah, I think for the larger companies, it's usually like that indeed. But I think it helps if you centralize your training budget and strategy, and then based on literally risks, where would you allocate more or less budget in what period of time, and reserve, because I guess probably for all of us it's the same as what we read today is outdated again yesterday. So it goes so quick. So budgets specifically in security, they fluctuate because it's difficult to keep up with the pace, I would say. So I would think have it centrally organized and then prioritize based on the risk, what you see in the market. And then it like you say, if there is an individual that would like to do something, that's not answering that specific question, but if you say on a strategic level, focus on company broad, and then at this moment, security is an important one to invest in, I believe, but that might be different hopefully different, yes, indeed, but have that centrally organized, I would advise.
But if you organize it centrally, how are you going to avoid that all kind of departments are going to fight for the budget?
Yeah, I guess budget is always unanimous with a fight, I would say. There's never enough budget. But I think if there's a good story behind it and you can clarify where the percentages of budgets go to what teams and with what reasoning, that helps. But at the end of the day, we all choose for our own profession because we find that one most interesting, so automatically most important. So it is difficult, but really share the narrative on why that is an urgent topic now compared to maybe a different topic. That definitely helps in gaining understanding from other departments. But I agree, it can be a bit bumpy, but yeah, share the narrative. I think that's the most important lesson there.
How is it organized in a smaller company where you work, this budget?
It depends on whenever you ask. So if you ask for a specific training and you can explain why you should do it and why it contributes to either your personal development or the development of the company, it's granted.
Yeah. So it's really data-driven, based on where there is a need. While I think what you're saying, Helen, the larger organization, they can steer based on forward-looking, strategic looking, basically what's happening out there in the market, probably what is the objective of the organization where they're heading to, what are the risks into achieving those strategies, and then based on that you say, okay, is upskilling relevant, important? It's not only in the security department or security upskilling, just upskilling in general. And then based on that, divide the budget, basically.
Yeah, for large and smaller companies, the basis is the same, I would say.
Yeah, and the challenges which I think that the smaller organization might have, I'm not sure whether they spend that much time strategizing also the up-learning part of it. So I think that will become more a little bit data-driven. Okay, what is the organization actually
True.
asking for?
Will be more ad hoc at the beginning, and then slowly, if the request gains is growing, then you'll have to strategize. But true, at the beginning it'll be more ad hoc. Agree. Yeah.
So I heard from Stefan that for the company he's working for, he feels that there's enough budget available. What is your view? Do you feel that there's enough budget available in organizations for security training, related trainings?
Personally, I think no, because, for example, the 3,000 a year you mentioned would cover one security training, which I, as a security professional, don't think is enough to do one training a year, for example. And yeah, there's a lot of online free stuff. I agree, that's how I got into security, but then you completely rely on people being intrinsically motivated. And of course, you would prefer all your employees to be intrinsically motivated, but that's not the reality, unfortunately.
But that is something the IT leads, the management should manage.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I think that's the thing in companies. They've hired people so many years ago. They're still there. So I think it's not enough. And also, I know from maybe Nemro, for example, there was also a department budget for trainings available next to your personal budget. But then you have the same problem you say as if you would have one central budget, because the one who asks the most, the one who screams the loudest, gets it.
Get the budget, yeah.
And I know that from experience when I worked there, is that I always asked for trainings and I always got every training.
Yeah.
I wanted to go to a conference, I got to go to the conference because I asked.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are not so proactive.
Okay.
And I think we need maybe a shift also in how companies see that. You see how companies in the market are now going towards unlimited vacation days, unlimited learning concepts. And I think that's especially for the unlimited learning, is really interesting to not in advance put a fixed number on it, but as long as people can justify why they need the money to do that,
Then there is money to do it. Yeah.
then there should be money to do it. And if that needs to come from somewhere else, yeah, then the finance people can figure that out.
Yeah.
Because also, yeah, like you said, you save a lot of money by preventing security breaches. And it's really hard to calculate, of course, how much money you win with it. But that's a fact we all know.
Yeah.
So there should be money for it. It's, for me, it's a no-brainer. But
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's making the translation from security professionals to the rest of the organization. So really standing between those two conversations, actually, and making them understand and feel what we mean. Like you said, we can't exactly put a number to it, but we can get close with facts and figures for them. Yeah.
All right, guys, I think, thank you so much. I think we are going to go into the Q&A part of the webinar today, and we have some questions. They were not addressed specifically to an individual as a panel member, so I'm just going to read the question and let's see what comes out of it. So Sebastian van der Meer, he's asking, if you are shifting left, you are shifting responsibilities to the left, how do you make sure also the accountability and the freedom of choice to the left as well? So how do you shift freedom but also accountability to the left?
I think that's a really hard question, because especially in bigger organizations, sometimes it's really hard to give complete freedom because of standards there are. For example, we want people to use the same authentication mechanism, for example. If everybody would use their own, it would become a mess. And if people leave the organization, you're not sure who has access to what. So I don't think you can grant complete freedom. But yeah, with freedom does come accountability, and then the accountability should be in the team. So if they make a choice to deviate from something, it also means they take on all the security responsibility for it. If that team is skilled enough, then maybe you can make exceptions for those situations, but that really depends on the skill level, I think, if you can even make them accountable for it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I find that a scary one, because indeed accountability, it shouldn't be based on an individual. It shouldn't be finger pointing that that person was accountable for that decision. I think if you work in a team, you have the trust of your team that it's not you as an individual making that decision, but you made an educated decision on that situation at that moment in time. And if it's logged, that should be your sort of accountability check, but not on an individual basis where people would feel like they will be addressed personally on making that mistake or that wrong decision at that moment. Even naming it a mistake might not be the...
But on the other hand as well, Helen, if everybody is accountable, then nobody is as well. This is what we have seen as well, right? So I think it's about finding a balance. So but I don't know what the answer is, so I think maybe we'll have a little bit more discussion on that.
What we do in Ebenabo, we also define standards and policies and enforce them for the critical issues. So, for example, severity 9 or 10 library issues. They simply need to be fixed. It's not allowed to deploy them to production. We have tooling for that. Within the Agile environment, all kind of policies are implemented to avoid critical issues in production. And of course, you need to find the balance. But it's a mix between technical mitigation and awareness, I believe.
Okay.
And yeah, can I make one last remark? I look at it from a security perspective, of course. You should allow DevOps and DevOps teams, I think, to deviate, because that's how innovative ideas exist. That's how in some companies, there was one team who was the first one to go to public cloud, for example. They deviated from what the rest did. And now you see that a lot of people follow. And security can be, it can be detective or preventive. So if you are always on the preventive side and say, well, this is the policy, so we prevent this and this and this and this, sometimes people need to be able to have an exception to that. And then maybe you need to put your controls elsewhere. So become more on the monitoring or detection side. Or maybe if one specific team wants to do something very different, put a skilled security engineer then to help them out, to make sure at least the security part is covered there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's sometimes not a very much appreciated sentence, but if you cannot comply, explain, and then at least there is some feedback happening within the organization of maybe the policy, the standard itself is not adequate anymore, looking at where we're going towards. That dialogue happens if people are allowed to deviate, but then with an explanation.
I mean, if you want to innovate, sometimes you need to color outside of the lines a little bit.
Yeah, that's probably the culture, right? The culture you have in your team, and do you feel like you can play around with that? And then at least if it does go wrong or a decision was made that you at a later stage think that might not have been the best decision, speak up about that mistake as well. It's okay, we tried, but we didn't have the right solution. That is okay, but if it's not being shared, people might feel like they're limited in their innovative ideas and they can't expand even further. But create a culture where people can openly share their experiences.
Great. I think with that we're going to leave it. Hopefully, Sebastian, that your question is answered. Let's go to the next one. God of Meta. I heard that the gap is reducing, but why do you think that this is happening, and how can we close the gap even further? And how would that also change the role of the security expert? I think we have already touched upon this one in our talk, but maybe there's something else that we want to say that makes God of happy.
Yeah, maybe I think it's a question. I think we all are aware, and already for I think what was latest was 2018. The latest report already shared we have different skills required in the security business, in the security profession. So we know that, but specifically what these skills are, we don't actually know. If you start looking on this online, what do you literally require from someone that is an IT engineer? What are the specific skills? There's not sort of a list where we have listed these, but we don't also have these for marketing, HR, finance, procurement, any other department. And I think that's a challenge at the moment, is that we're facing this question quite a lot with our clients. But the question isn't out there. So literally what we're doing now is we're combining expertises from different areas and industries on, can we define the bare minimum skills that are required in people in each area of the organization, and being it specifically here for IT engineers, what skills do we need them to have? But we say then we feel like we have the basic hygiene there. Maybe in 2 or 3 years we'll need different skills, but for now, really make it simple. What do they need? What 5 core skills would you require them to have? And that will be the starting point to close that gap, I believe.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. I'm not sure whether you guys have anything to add to that, but I see the industry struggling with this to really understand what are good learning paths from a security perspective. Doesn't mean that for the security department, but just from a security perspective, what are good learning paths for my workforce to follow, for them to be effective in security. I see that not being defined, and it's quite hard.
I think the answer is also there's not a single learning path, because there is a difference between having a basic set of security skills, so knowing something about encryption, something about identity and access management, something about logging and monitoring, and actually applying security to different technologies or environments. So if you are working in a container-based implementation, you're expected to also know some security details on that. Just knowing how access control works is not going to help you there. So I think you need to have different paths based on the technologies people are actually working with, and provide people with like a pick and choose, menu. True. Where you have there's a few basic skills you should have some knowledge on, and then you can pick and choose from everything that's out there at the moment, which is only growing and growing, which makes it more complex, of course, to work in this field. But
yeah, I think what we usually use is the simple base of having personas. So we categorize people where we say, these are the bare minimum skills, and this will be a complete security professional. So what categories do we have in between? And for each of these journeys, we would have different personas, how you would reach that maturity level. Because indeed, for some people, just having the basic hygiene of security is enough. They don't need to become a full professional. Just being able to ask the right questions, understanding the risks for their own function, for their own departments, that is sufficient. And for others, you would need a complete different path. But helping categorizing them and defining personas for these categories is a very sort of easy but very effective way to define these learning pathways.
Yeah. I like it. Stefan, anything to add from your side?
Yes, so as I said, I don't think it's a huge issue. If there is a small gap, of course, the smaller the gap, the better. Yeah, but what is important to include the security professional at an early stage to increase the awareness of the development engineer, and if there's a gap or if there's a risk, identify the risk and execute the right decision making about how to take the risk forward.
Yeah. But I think in an ideal world, engineers also themselves would be able to recognize if they introduce a security risk, and especially if it's a minor one, that they can also have some decision making on what to do with it or how to deal with it, and then more use the security professional as like a consultant who can provide you with extra information instead of relying on them to always review everything or look at everything. I think that's the whole thing about the upskilling and DevOps part, is that we want DevOps engineers to recognize these small security things where they think, hey, maybe it's not a smart idea to do this because this might introduce a security risk. Let me check.
Yeah, is one way of doing security at scale, of course, because the security department doesn't have enough people to always be able to be there for the DevOps engineers.
And the DevOps engineers know their own application the best. So especially if you have concepts where one security engineer is maybe helping 10 different development teams, you don't know their application through and through, but they do. So if you arm them with the skills to at least recognize if there might be a risk that they're introducing, and then they can verify with someone who actually knows a lot about security. I think that's a model that would work a lot more, and that would also close the gap because it makes the lines really short.
So what I also see happening sometimes is that that development engineers are enforced to not to address all gaps, to meet all kinds of delivery deadlines. Product owners are pushing to get things delivered. And then in those cases, mitigating security issues is seen as a risk instead of an enabler to get good quality code into production. And those kind of things should be managed. And this is not something a developer or a security engineer can manage. It's also a management problem. And because security should be everybody's responsibility. It should not be a single developer or a single security engineer responsibility.
Exactly, it should be acknowledged that it's important.
Great, I hope that we were able to make Gaurav a little bit more happier. Shall we go to the next question and maybe the final question, because then that will be enough time to just go for the closing. And this is a question which I find quite interesting. It's being asked by Rishabh. Security is quite broad as a field in itself, and I fully agree DevOps and security need to work together. However, I feel the need that there should be security competencies included in hiring of DevOps engineer. So that's a part of their job and not an additional siloed responsibility. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so of course he does agree, but the reality is that the people you want, the sheep with 5 feet, they are simply not always available in the market. So you need to hire also less qualified people and invest in learning and invest in mindset. But ideal engineers, the ideal security engineers, they're not always available. They are very scarce.
But do you feel that these questions are asked, right? When you already find somebody that's good or actually great for your IT engineer profile that you're looking for, that you're daring to ask that question, okay, how are you doing with security? And what sort of question would you ask to a DevOps engineer then?
So those kind of questions I ask, of course, and if I look to CVs, if I look to candidates, I look into these kind of fields, but I also am realistic. I also am realistic that many of those people do not have the skills we would like to have. And in those areas, you should make sure that you have a wide balanced team. You should have 1 or 2 seniors, 2 mediors, and 4 juniors. And these junior people should have the mindset and the capability to learn. So those kind of things are important for me.
Yeah, for us, I think it relates to what we touched upon previously about the workforce that you have. So understanding the team and what you need in the years to come. And we usually use the 4 Bs where you say buy, borrow, build, or bot. So do you buy, so hire, attract new employees that have that specific skill? Do you borrow it, so externally hiring consultants in for a specific amount of time? Do you build the expertise in your team, so upskilling the employees? Or bot, can you automate any element of the work that they're doing? And constantly addressing those questions to your actual workforce, that will help creating a strategy to respond, because it is indeed a nightmare at the moment, finding the right people.
But with Helen, if you look at the importance of cybersecurity now, and especially for organizations that are heavily and more heavily relying on IT, where IT development is a core part then, right? Can you say that's a skill you don't want to have within that team, right? With the strategy of buying it in, or I think the 3 other types that you remember, like how often would you select to say, let me buy it in and not embed it sustainably in my IT workforce, because those are anyway there to stay, and IT is there to stay within that organization.
Yeah, and like you say, it's becoming growingly important. So you need a basic hygiene of your team. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Cheyenne, any last thoughts on this one?
I think, like Stefan said, it's not realistic to expect someone already has this knowledge, because the pool to hire from is really small. But I think if you make it an ongoing topic in the team, knowledge will also increase over time. Because if it's always something that's addressed, for example, in the review meetings or in the planning meetings, that a security thing needs to be resolved, it becomes more top of mind for people. So it also slowly increases the knowledge a little bit within the team, because like we said, people leave organizations. So you cannot put all your eggs in one basket and have one person in the team who is great at security, because then the team maybe breaks apart, or this person leaves and it's gone. So it's better to have everybody in the team have a little bit of knowledge, have them continuously working on it with each other, discussing it. That keeps it more alive, I think, than just trying to find the one perfect unicorn engineer.
And do you guys think, by the way, that's a link maybe to Rishabh, because maybe Rishabh is a DevOps engineer, I don't know, but do you think that when DevOps engineers get upskilled more and more in security, that their market value will increase as well? So maybe that's a call out to DevOps engineer. If you want to, be more valued in the industry in terms of, salary and whatnot, then upskilling in security makes sense, I would say. Also upskilling in security. It's not only that, of course. Yeah. And then we have probably, let me just check, because we still have 3 minutes for one more question. Shall we do that?
Pick your favorite.
This is the last one. So Gaurav is asking, we're talking about security awareness for DevOps team members, but I think it's equally important to educate management, since a lot of time it's POs and managers that are asking for making a choice. How could this be achieved effectively? So upskilling management, that's what Gaurav is talking about.
Yeah, so that's what I just mentioned. It's not only, it should be everybody's responsibility, and it's not only about upskilling management, it's also making the impact clear towards the management. A product owner, they are from the business, they do not have IT knowledge. So if some security engineer comes with some security issue, the product owner, the first thought will be, hey, I need to deliver my product, I need to deliver my feature. So you need to be very clear in the impact and the likelihood of the issue. And if you explain that the right way towards product owner, then the product owner will say, okay, let's take some time to fix the issue. So communication and explanation and working together, those are very important, because you cannot expect from a product owner that he or she will pass a CISP course, for example.
Yeah. I agree with Stefan, and I don't think that's something new. That's been an issue ever since I started in security. Is that a lot of security professionals don't really speak the language of the business.
Exactly.
So they explain this very technical risk, and the product owner just hears, okay, extra work.
And then not sexy way, not sexy way.
Not sexy way.
Yeah, not sexy way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's why we have this team that I operate in. It's security and behavior. So people, like you say, they understand the basics of those risks that security addresses, but they can translate it to easily accessible and understandable ways to the rest of the organization. So that other people outside of security, they understand the urgency, they understand the impact, and understand why it's a co-responsibility for both of them. Because indeed, yeah, like I said at the beginning, I feel like I'm a translator sometime between two worlds, and it's actually a fact.
Yeah, and I think it's also because sometimes security things can be very complex.
Yeah.
If things are complex, people tend to push them away maybe, or put them in this box with, oh, this is not going to happen to me. It sounds very unlikely.
Yeah.
So you need to relate it to real life examples.
So maybe the one of the takeaways for the product owners or managers is, at least when somebody comes with a security related question to you, have an open mind. Maybe that person is not able to fully explain it to you, but at least have an open mind to ask probing questions about it.
Yeah, take it, translate it to the table, or otherwise, one of the companies I currently work for is, they have sort of, I find it quite a bold move, but they have a security team with 2 communication experts in there full time. And these 2 ladies are running like maniacs because it's a lot of work on translating it. And after a year now, we see that actually they understand each other more than ever. And the value is, well, shown literally on a daily basis in how they translate these technical, complex issues to the rest of the organization. Yeah.
But I also find an IT engineer responsibility to explain it the right way towards a product owner. You have seen many cases in which IT engineers say, oh, I cannot meet deadlines because the security engineer says that I need to fix the security issue. And then you have a
Instead of saying, this is important for our product, we need to address this.
Great.
And I think it's also the last takeaway for product owners, I think, is a lot of people think it's not going to happen. It's not going to, the risk is not going to pop up.
Yeah.
But eventually it will, of course. And it will also maybe hold you back in future developments if you try to ignore a risk now, and it can become bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's more work to resolve it later. So
those kind of argumentations from a DevOps engineer towards the product owners. Yeah, great. I think this is all the time we have for our statements and the questions. Hopefully, we were of course not able to address all the questions, but more on that soon. I just wanted to check whether we can stream the Menti now. Can you give us a sign whether the Menti is, people are seeing it? So please, guys, a request to you. We want to improve. Please let us know what is it that you liked about this webinar so far, and what is it that you think we can do better. That would be the first question. Please let me know when the first question has been answered online, and then we can go to the next question. Or Paul. So give people online a little bit of time to fill in. Yeah. Continuous improvement, Stefan. We also need feedback. Give it 15 more seconds, I would say 20 more seconds, and then we can go to the next ball.
We're not allowed to join this one, are we? We need to be silent now suddenly.
You give your feedback to me after this session, yeah. Are we moving towards the next question? Okay. So the next question will be related on, we have 2 more webinars upcoming this year. So one will be in September, one will be in November. So what sort of other topics beside what we discussed today that you would like to see addressed, right? So what sort of other questions, statement, topics that you think is relevant, to increase the awareness on the gap that we're seeing, the challenge that we're seeing, will help. So any suggestion on that, that's what we're asking for you now. I think the poll is now online. You can see it there as well. So I'll give you guys a minute to provide us with great ideas. It's just 1 minute before 12, so right on time, I would say. Before lunch. I think while people are giving us the data, I first of all really want to thank all of you, especially our panel members, to making the time and being here and sharing your thoughts with the rest of the world. I think don't underestimate how much this can help people. And the recording of today's session, we will make it available for the people that have registered for the session. Questions that we were not able to answer because of time limitation, we're going to address those questions in text. I'm going to mail it to the group that's registered for it. And yes, I hope that people liked it online. And then if that's the case, please also spread the word for the next webinars that are upcoming. But very importantly, thank you so much, panel members. We have a gift for you, but we'll give that after the session is closed because we don't want to use the time of people online for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun doing.
Yeah, thank you. I had fun as well. All right, I think we are done.